Alien blood sprayed Carter's face as the Ladosian priest crumpled to the temple floor, humanity's first casualty in the coming war. Just hours earlier, Sergeant Tyler Carter had been part of the security team escorting Ambassador Helena Novak and the human diplomatic delegation on Letos. Their mission? Strengthen humanity's alliance with the Ladosians. But during a lull in talks, Carter and Private Reese Hudson made a fatal mistake. Captivated by the exotic alien culture, they ventured into the city and stumbled upon what seemed like a wild street festival. Hundreds of Ladosians were dancing and chanting with abandon. Intrigued, the two soldiers joined in, mimicking the frenzied movements. Too late did they realize it was no celebration, but the sacred rite of Kotor, a solemn ritual venerating the Ladosians' highest deity. The humans' unintended mockery was seen as an unforgivable insult by the horrified priests. High Priest Vox demanded the offenders' heads, stoking the outrage of conservative factions already opposed to the Earth Alliance. As tensions exploded, the human delegation found themselves besieged in their compound by a mob of religious zealots. Vox issued his ultimatum: surrender the perpetrators to Ladosian justice, or face the wrath of the mighty Ladosian Star Empire. But Earth does not abandon her own. When the Ladosian ships opened fire, the human fleet answered in kind. Now Carter, Hudson, and their squad are the only ones who can prevent the conflict from consuming both worlds. In the Temple of Kotor, where it all began, they will fight to the last round and pray it's enough. Jack stood rigidly before the Ladosian tribunal, fists tight as the judges glared down at him with unmistakable contempt. Hudson shifted uneasily beside him, beads of sweat forming on his brow under the harsh lights of the courtroom. Despite the stifling tension, Jax forced his voice to remain steady as he addressed the court. Your Honors, I cannot express enough how deeply sorry we are for our actions at the temple. It was a terrible mistake born of ignorance, not malice. We meant no disrespect to your beliefs or traditions. If you would just allow us to— The head judge slammed a gavel on the podium, cutting off Jax's plea. Enough! Your feeble excuses change nothing. You defiled our most sacred rite, an offense that carries the highest penalty under Ladosian law. The judge's eyes narrowed. No amount of sorry can undo such blasphemy. Jax's heart sank as he saw the hardened grit in the judges' faces. They had already decided the human's fate. Trial be damned. He caught Ambassador Novak's gaze in the audience, her face etched with worry and frustration. She had been fighting tooth and nail for their release, but the Ladosians refused to budge an inch. As the tribunal droned on, Jax found his attention drawn to a cloaked figure in the back of the room. The mysterious Ladosian seemed out of place among the crowd of angry spectators. Jax felt the figure's eyes boring into him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Hours later, Jax paced the confines of the cell, while Hudson lay on the hard bench, an arm draped over his eyes. The creak of the door jolted them to attention. In walked the cloaked figure from the courtroom, a female Ladosian with striking violet eyes that seemed to pierce right through Jax. "Who are you?" he asked warily. The Ladosian lowered her hood, revealing intricate facial markings. "I am Xyloth, and I'm here to help you escape this madness." Hudson scoffed. "Escape? So we can have an even bigger manhunt on our backs? No thanks." Xyloth shook her head. "You don't understand. High Priest Vox is using your transgression as an excuse to sabotage the Earth Alliance. He's been looking for a way to consolidate power, and now he has the perfect spark to ignite a holy war. You're just pawns in his game." Jax stared at her, pieces clicking into place. "What do you know about all this?" "I'm an anthropologist. I've studied your culture and I know you meant no harm, but Vox and his followers will twist the narrative to serve their own ends. Unless we expose the truth, both our worlds will pay the price." Xyloth held out a hand, her eyes pleading. "Please, you have to trust me. We're running out of time." Jax glanced at Hudson, seeing his own uncertainty reflected back. But what choice did they have? He turned to Xyloth and nodded. "All right, we're in. What's the plan?" As they raced through the winding streets, alarms blaring in their wake, Jax could only pray they weren't too late. The fate of Earth and Lados hung by a thread, and he would do whatever it took to keep that thread from snapping. Alarms blared through the human compound as Jax raced down the corridor, his heart pounding in time with his footsteps. He had to get to Xyloth before it was too late. Bursting into the armory, he grabbed a pulse rifle and a handful of grenades, stuffing them into his pack. In the chaos of the space battle raging overhead, Jax slipped out of the compound unnoticed. He sprinted across the tarmac towards the Ladosian shuttles, praying that his hastily formed plan would work. The shuttle's engines roared to life as Jax's fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls. He gritted his teeth as the craft lifted off, narrowly avoiding the energy bolts from the compound's auto turrets. Weaving through the war-torn cityscape, Jax pushed the engines to their limit. The prison loomed ahead, its obsidian walls jam-packed with gun emplacements. Jax took a steadying breath, then toggled the shuttle's IFF signal to broadcast a religious pilgrim code. "Pilgrim Shuttle Zeta Niner, transmit clearance," a gruff voice crackled over the comm. Jax swallowed hard. Clearance code, Vocalar 772. He held his breath, praying that the code Xyloth had given him would hold up. A tense beat passed. Then, clearance granted, proceed to landing pad 3. Jax expertly guided the shuttle down, his mind racing ahead to the next phase. He strode across the landing pad, his demeanor carefully modulated to project pious humility. The guards waved him through with barely a glance. Inside the prison, Jax moved swiftly, his eyes scanning the cell numbers. He turned a corner, and there she was, Xyloth, bruised but defiant behind the crackling force field. Jax's fingers danced over the control panel, and the field sputtered out. But before they could escape, a cold voice stopped them in their tracks. "Going somewhere?" Jax spun to see Vox standing there, flanked by a dozen heavily armed guards. The High Priest's eyes glittered with malice. "Did you really think you could just waltz in here and take my prize?" Jax stepped forward, shielding Xyloth. His mind raced, seeking any advantage. Then it hit him, a desperate gamble, but their only chance. "I challenge you to Calvornock," Jax shouted, invoking the ancient right of trial by combat. "Let the gods decide between us, Vox." Vox's eyes widened, then narrowed in calculation. He could not refuse the challenge without losing face. "Very well, human. We will settle this in the Grand Temple, for all to witness your destruction." Jax's muscles burned with fatigue as he circled Vox on the temple floor, the smell of incense thick in his nostrils. The Ladosian's blows came hard and fast, fueled by righteous fury. Jax barely managed to deflect a strike that would have crushed his skull. Blood trickled into his eyes from a gash on his forehead. His body screamed for rest, but Jax pushed himself onward. He had to hold out, to buy enough time for Xyloth's message to reach the ambassador. Vox hammered at Jax's defenses, the Ladosian's face twisted in a snarl. "Yield, blasphemer!" But Jax refused to submit. He thought of Earth, of the billions of lives hanging in the balance, of Xyloth risking everything to uncover the truth. Memories surged through Jax's battered body, the temple plaza, the crowds of worshippers, the steps of the ritual dance. In a flash of insight, Jax understood. The Rite of Couture was not just an empty display, but a battle against the darkness within. Jax began to move, his body flowing through the dance that had started it all. Vox faltered, confusion and outrage warring on his face. Jax pressed the momentary advantage, spinning and ducking under Vox's guard. His hand shot out, fingers curling around Vox's wrist. With a deft twist, he sent the Ladosian's blade clattering across the stone. Jax leveled his own weapon at Vox's throat, chest heaving with exertion. "Yield," Jax growled. Vox glared back, hatred etched in every line of his face. But before he could spit a retort, Ambassador Novak's voice boomed across every comm channel. "People of Ledos, we have been deceived. The human visitors acted without malice. High Priest Vox and his followers manipulated this crisis for their own gain, to sabotage the Alliance and seize power." Stunned silence reigned in the temple. Then a new transmission cut in. The Ladosian Prime Counselor, her face grave. "In light of this evidence, I am ordering an immediate ceasefire. All Ladosian forces, stand down at once. Vox and his conspirators will face justice for their crimes against our people and our allies. Jax sagged with relief as Ladosian soldiers marched in, bearing not weapons, but the sashes of honor guard. They encircled Vox and his lackeys, placing them under arrest. In the sudden hush, Jax knelt before the temple altar. Reaching deep within himself, he began the rite of Kotor, each movement an apology and a pledge. Through his dance, he would carry the weight of humanity's transgression and atonement. Xyloth knelt beside him, tears tracing her cheeks. Across the worlds of Earth and Lados, millions of humans and Ladosians echoed their motions in a symphony of reconciliation. But even in that moment of hard-won peace, Jax knew their trials were nowhere near the end. The conspiracy had been thwarted, but the divisions and mistrust it had exacerbated still threatened to tear the alliance apart. As the temple dancers swirled around them in a whirl of silk, Jax and Xyloth's eyes met. In that shared gaze was understanding, grit, and the glimmering seeds of something more. Together they would begin the long, slow process of healing, working to bridge the gulf between their peoples. Step by step, day by day, they would strive to build a true and lasting partnership. For only in unity could they hope to forge a future bright enough to banish the shadows of the past. The temple's incense faded as Jax stepped out into the Ladosian sunlight. Months had passed since that fateful day, yet the weight of responsibility still pressed upon his shoulders. He glanced at Xyloth, her violet eyes meeting his with a mix of grit and warmth. "Ready for today's lesson?" she asked, leading him towards the sprawling cultural center. Jax nodded, his mind already racing through the intricacies of Ladosian honorifics. The past few months had been a whirlwind of intensive study, language, customs, history, and the nuanced spiritual practices that permeated every aspect of Ladosian life. Inside the center, holographic displays flickered to life, showcasing the rich tapestry of Ladosian culture. Jax immersed himself in the lessons, his fingers tracing delicate calligraphy as Xyloth's melodic voice guided him through ancient texts. "The essence of Kotor lies not just in the dance," she explained, "but in the harmony between body and spirit." Jax absorbed every word, determined to bridge the chasm between their peoples. Yet even as he delved deeper into Ladosian wisdom, reports of unrest trickled in from across the stars. On Earth, protesters gathered outside the Interstellar Relations Building. Jax's face glared back at him from angry placards, his name now a rallying cry for those who saw accommodation with aliens as weakness. "Traitor!" they shouted, their voices carried across light years by the news feeds. "Human lives matter more than alien feelings." Jax steeled himself against the vitriol, focusing instead on the vital work ahead. He joined Ambassador Novak on her diplomatic tour, standing tall as they addressed wary crowds on a dozen worlds. On Korlash, the air hung heavy with tension as they stepped off the shuttle. A sea of alien faces greeted them, their expressions a mix of curiosity and barely concealed hostility. "We come in peace," Jax began, his voice carrying across the plaza, "to listen, to learn, and to forge a path forward together." Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. A Korlashi elder strode forward, his craggy features set in a scowl. "Pretty words, human, but actions speak louder. If you truly wish to make amends, prove it." Jax didn't hesitate. He knelt before the elder, bowing his head in the traditional Korlashi pose of supplication. "I offer myself in the rite of abasement to bear the weight of our transgressions and seek a new beginning." The crowd fell silent as Jax underwent the grueling ritual. Hours passed as he endured physical trials and recited ancient oaths of penance. Sweat mingled with ceremonial paints on his skin, every muscle screaming for relief. Just as the rite neared its completion, chaos erupted. Explosions rocked the plaza, screams piercing the air. Jax's eyes widened in horror as he saw the telltale insignia of Vox's followers among the attackers. "Get down!" Hudson shouted, tackling Jax to the ground as debris rained around them. The faithful bodyguard's body went limp, his final act one of protection. In the aftermath of the attack, Jax stood before Hudson's flag-draped casket, his voice raw with emotion as he addressed the assembled mourners, human, Ladosian, and a dozen other species. Hudson gave his life so that others might live, Jax said, his fists clenched at his sides. He believed in a future where our differences don't divide us, but strengthen us. We cannot let his sacrifice be in vain. Xyloth placed a comforting hand on his arm, her presence an anchor in the storm of grief and anger. Jax drew a deep breath, perseverance hardening in his eyes. The path ahead won't be easy, he continued, but we must move forward, not with blind hatred or fear, but with understanding and compassion. Only then can we truly honor those we've lost. In the days that followed, Jax threw himself into action. He coordinated with Ladosian security forces, poring over intelligence reports to root out Vox's network. At the same time, he redoubled his efforts at outreach, organizing cultural exchanges and open forums for humans and Ladosians to engage directly. Deep in the neon-lit underbelly of the Ladosian capital, Jax crouched beside Xyloth. Their multi-species strike team moved with practiced precision, closing in on Vox's hidden base. Team 2 in position, Hudson's replacement whispered over the comm. Awaiting your signal. Jax's heart pounded as he gave the order. Execute. The next moments passed in a blur of plasma fire and close-quarters combat. Jax's muscles burned as he fought his way through the terrorist stronghold, Xyloth at his side. In a cavernous laboratory, they found the fruits of Vox's twisted vision, vats of a virulent pathogen engineered to target human biology. With seconds to spare, they neutralized the threat. Vox himself waited in the heart of the complex, a sneer twisting his once noble features. You understand nothing, he spat as Jax approached. Our world was pure before your kind corrupted it. Jax met the fallen priest's gaze, seeing not a monster, but a man consumed by fear and hatred. There is no purity in isolation, Jax replied softly. Only stagnation. Our peoples have so much to offer each other, if we can move past our prejudices. As if to punctuate his words, a stray blast from a cornered terrorist struck the ceiling. Jax found himself shoved aside as Xyloth's body collided with his, taking the brunt of the falling debris. In the rubble-strewn aftermath, Jax cradled Xyloth's unconscious form. A trickle of violet blood ran from a gash on her forehead, but her pulse beat strong beneath his fingers. Their eyes met as she stirred, a wealth of unspoken emotion passing between them. Weeks later, Jax stood before the restored Grand Temple. Humans and Ladosians alike filled the plaza, their faces upturned in hope. As the first notes of the ancient hymn rose into the air, Jax began to move. His body flowed through the steps of the Rite of Couture, each gesture a bridge between worlds. Around him, thousands joined in the dance, their movements a physical manifestation of unity. As the final chords faded, Jax's gaze swept across the sea of faces, alien and familiar, wary and welcoming. He knew the work was not nearly finished, but for the first time since that fateful day in the temple, he felt the stirring of true hope. Hope, but at that moment, he couldn't have foreseen the long road ahead. Decades passed. Jax's hair grayed, lines etched themselves around his eyes, yet his grit remained undiminished. The alliance between humans and Ladosians had grown stronger, roots intertwining despite the occasional tremor. On the 20th anniversary of the crisis, Jax stood before a solemn crowd gathered at the base of the Grand Temple. A gleaming monument of obsidian and silver stretched towards the sky, names etched in 100 languages. We remember, Jax began, his voice carrying across the hushed plaza. We remember those who gave everything so that we might stand here today, united. His gaze swept over the assembled dignitaries, human, Ladosian, and representatives from a dozen other worlds. The Jax Concordat, as it had come to be known, had grown far beyond its humble beginnings. Xyloth stood at his side, her violet eyes reflecting the same depth of experience. Their bond had only strengthened over the years, transcending simple labels of friendship or partnership. As Jax continued his address, a faint tremor ran through the ground. Before anyone could react, the world exploded into chaos. The searing heat of plasma blasts filled the air, screams piercing through the din of collapsing masonry. Jax found himself thrown to the ground, Xyloth's body shielding him from the worst of the blast. He struggled to his feet, ears ringing, smoke stinging his eyes. "Xyloth!" he called out, frantically searching for her amid the chaos. He found her crumpled form beneath a fallen pillar. With trembling hands, he cradled her head, violet blood seeping between his fingers. "Jax," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "promise me unity at all costs." Her eyes fluttered closed as medics rushed to their side. Jax's world narrowed to the fading pulse beneath his fingers, Xyloth's last words echoing in his mind. In the days that followed, as the death toll mounted and recriminations flew, Jax retreated into himself. The faces of the lost haunted him: Hudson, Xyloth, countless others who had given everything for the dream of unity. On the seventh day, he emerged from his quarters, a fire burning in his eyes that even his closest advisors found unsettling. Without a word, he strode into the emergency summit called to address the crisis. "We've tried half measures," Jax declared, silencing the bickering diplomats. "We've made progress, yes, but as long as we remain separate peoples, there will always be those who seek to divide us." He activated a holographic display, complex schematics filling the air. "I give you the xenographic initiative, not just cultural exchange, not just cooperation, but true unity." Gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the chamber as Jax outlined his audacious plan. The genetic blending of humans and Ladosians, creating a new hybrid species that would bridge the gap once and for all. "You're talking about the end of both our species!" a human delegate shouted, face flushed with anger. "I'm talking about our survival," Jax countered, "about honoring every drop of blood spilled in the name of peace." The debate raged for days. Protests erupted in the streets of 100 worlds. But in the end, a razor-thin majority voted to move forward. Jax stood before the gene resequencing chamber, his heart pounding. He thought of Xyloth, of Hudson, of all those who had sacrificed everything for this moment. "Are you certain?" the chief geneticist asked, concern etched on her features. Jax nodded, stepping into the chamber. As the process began, he felt his very essence shifting, rewriting itself into something new. Pain lanced through every cell of his body, but he embraced it, knowing that with each agonizing moment, he came closer to becoming the living bridge between two peoples. The chamber hissed open, steam billowing out. Jax stumbled forward on unsteady legs, catching his reflection in a nearby screen. The face that stared back was neither human nor Ladosian, but something altogether new. He straightened, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. This was only the beginning. The real work lay ahead, navigating the treacherous waters of a new shared identity. As Jax took his first steps into an uncertain future, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the shadows, forces were already aligning against this bold new vision. The path forward would not be easy, but he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.